Mr. Schoener was a part of the National Guard military police starting in 1956. He was drafted from the Myerstown area to his basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky. After accomplishing basic training, Mr. Schoener flew to Fort Ord, California. This is where he was assigned to the 498th Combat Engineer Group. Soon after training in California, Mr. Schoener spent the rest of his time in Germany.
We sailed to Germany, and I spent the rest of my time in Germany.
As being part of the 498th Combat Construction Group, Mr. Schoener and his group were responsible for building bridges.
What we did was build bridges. We built pontoon bridges and the Bailey Bridge, and these were that of course that was our duty.
While in Germany, Mr. Schoener volunteered for being a truck driver, since many others were volunteering for jobs. The first truck he drove was a deuce and a half, or a M35 truck. This truck was responsible for carrying troops and supplies to their destinations. Soon after, Mr. Schoener started driving the military jeep. He drove Officer McRae to his destinations and soon became his personal driver.
They needed a jeep driver one day, and I drove the jeep for our officer in our platoon.
Besides being part of the 498th Construction Group, Mr. Schoener was also a military policeman. The drill sergeant also taught the military policeman to be an infantry member too, making soldiers more versatile while in the service.
While being in the Army, Mr. Schoener enjoyed his time. He got the chance to travel around Germany, Italy, and Brussels. Mr. Schoener was very proud of his service and bravery. One of Mr. Schoener's favorite memories from being in the service was his trips to other countries. Another one of Mr. Schoener's favorite memory is all the friends that he met.
Because I had a lot of friends, and we even had fun while we were out camping. We camped in the snow. Sometimes you had to dig 2 feet of snow away to lay a sleeping bag down to sleep. But it was fun. We were young, so it was easy. That was fun.
Another task that Mr. Schoener had in the Army was driving the deuce and a half. At first, it really scared me, said Mr. Schoener during the interview. Since he was a part of the 498th Combat Engineers, he had a lot of things to haul in the deuce and a half, like ground and stone. Since again he was part of the 498th Combat Engineers, they had to build a lot of bridges because in war, one of the first things the enemy would do is blow up bridges. The group would build Bailey bridges. These bridges were not built to be permanent like a solid bridge. They also built pontoon bridges. Bridges like these float on large inner tubes on the Danube River for large vehicles, troops, and supplies to easily be able to cross the river without getting wet or messy. Along with building them, Mr. Schoener and the rest of the 498th Combat Engineers set the record for the fastest time building bridges. Mr. Schoener described his colonel as a really gung-ho guy. Because he wanted to always set these records for building bridges, he doesn't know if the record still stands today.
Mr. Schoener was a corporal in the Army or a Spec 3, but the man who he drove a jeep for in the service one day offered Mr. Schoener a spot as a sergeant. The only problem was Mr. Schoener would have to stop driving for the man who offered him the job, which he didn't want to do.
Well, I said, well, look, just forget the stripe and just keep me a Spec 3, and I'll drive your jeep.
As Mr. Schoener looked through his old photographs and books of him and his friends from his time in the service, he said it was great because he had forgotten a lot of things from when he served. He looked through a book showing us him on the rifle range, physical training, and him doing a gas-chambered escape test.
Mr. Schoener actually bought a car in Germany while being in the service. He tried to buy a nice Volkswagen but ended up buying a Hillman Minx. While Mr. Schoener was home, he decided to keep in touch with his friends in the 498th Combat Group. He keeps in touch with his friends in Georgia, Tennessee, and Uniontown, Pennsylvania.
Mr. Schoener was glad he served in the Army.
Even though I wasn't in wartime, I was there, and it was a good experience.
He described how he thought many people would benefit to join the Army, or a similar branch of service. Through his years in the service, Mr. Schoener made a lot of friends as well.